We're 2 weeks into the Winter Olympics, and we've already gotten 4 years worth of moments. There's been a ton of conversation among fans and the media about everything from scoring controversies to athletes voicing their political opinions. Team USA women's hockey has been absolutely dominant throughout the tournament, outscoring opponents 31-1 over the first 6 games. Today, they head into a gold medal showdown against longtime rival Canada, a matchup that always delivers drama. The American men's hockey team just won an overtime thriller against Sweden to advance to the semifinals. In figure skating, Alyssa Liu has put herself firmly in medal position with a top 3 finish in the short program. Amber Glenn landed the triple axel but turned a triple toe loop into a double and seems all but out of podium position heading into the free skate. On the men's side, Ilya Malanin's disastrous free skate was a shock to everyone who's watched him in international competition these last few seasons. But the support for both him and Amber has been heartwarming to see. Fans and fellow skaters have rallied around them, reminding us just how unforgiving a sport figure skating is and the enormous expectations that we place on these young athletes. Michaela Schifrin captured gold in the women's slalom, adding yet another medal to her Olympic legacy. And at 41 years old, Alana Myers-Taylor finally won the gold that had eluded her in women's monobob. Her 6th medal makes her the most decorated woman bobsledder of all time and the most decorated Black athlete in Winter Olympics history. The Milano Cortina Games have also marked a milestone that goes beyond the medal count, with the highest participation of women in Winter Olympics history continuing a steady push toward gender parity across events. Of course, it wouldn't be the Olympics without a little or a lot of chaos. Controversy has swirled around Olympic ice dance after French duo Gabriela Papadakis and Guillaume Cizeron edged out American stars Madison Chalk and Evan Bates, reigniting debates about judging standards. It always happens on the ice, and it always involves the French. Outside the rink, the Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich was disqualified after wearing a helmet honoring the country's athletes killed in the war with Russia, a moment that underscored how global politics can't be separated from the games. The triumph, the heartbreak, the disputes, it all adds to the intensity of the Olympics. The blend of excellence and emotion and drama, it's what makes the games such a spectacle and why we become obsessed with them every 4 years. Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome to another episode of Sportly. This week, we have the commish, Sarah Spain, with us on the show. If you follow women's sports or any sports, you probably already know her voice. Sarah is the host of Good Game with Sarah Spain on iHeartRadio, the first daily podcast dedicated exclusively to women's sports. She's also the content director of iHeart Women's Sports Network, and she's been a consistent, outspoken advocate for better coverage of women athletes and deeper investment in the space. And she's almost as decorated as some of the Olympians we're about to talk about. She has won both a Peabody and an Emmy Award. I've known Sarah for a long time. We worked together at ESPNW, and I've always admired the way that she combines her reporting with a clear-eyed perspective, and frankly, that she doesn't take shit from anyone. Right now, she's in the thick of the Winter Olympics in Italy, moving between venues and towns and press conferences and, of course, late evening podcast recordings. She gives us her astute view on what it's actually like on the ground in Italy, how the media is framing these games, and what conversations and drama are happening behind the scenes. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I believe you are currently in Cortina, correct?
I am. Our third stop in our Italian adventure. La Dolce Vita it is.
It has looked amazing. So you started in Milan and then Livigno and now Cortina, and you will go back to Milan for the hockey finals, correct?
Yeah. And it's been interesting to see how different the vibe is. As my producer, Alex, who's been my Olympic Sherpa for this whole trip, if you're ever going to the Olympics, I highly recommend going with someone who spent like 6 or 7 years as an NBC Sports Olympic researcher. Because the girl knows literally everything about all the things. And I'm like, what's this? How many times do they this? How many of these count? Is there a final? And she's just like, yep. I know it all. But as she said, the motto for the Olympic is it's your vibe. IT for Italy, it's your vibe. And then depending on the area you're in, it's slightly different. And the vibe is very different depending on the area that you're in. Milan is like, oh, there's an Olympics here as well as just Milan, right? And if you're not at the venues, you don't notice it as much. Livigno's small, a lot of friends and family and teams and not as many fans. And then Cortina thus far has been, we've only been here a couple days, vibrant and lively, truly full of the Olympic spirit, and very much a place that remembers when they hosted it so long ago the first time and carries that in the spirit of the town. So the kind of crossover of all the historic remembrances of their first hosting and this one are colliding in some really cool ways. And it's a vibe.
What's been the difference in the vibe and what's been your favorite vibe in your stop so far?
Well, like I said, Milan is just a huge international city. So when you're at the venues, you certainly know it's the Olympics, although it's kind of quirky at times. You know, there was a lot of conversation about how Milan didn't have to build any new venues other than the hockey stadium that was barely finished in time. There's 2 hockey stadiums, though. The one that we've been going to is really a conference center with a hockey stadium built inside of it. So it's a very strange experience. You're walking around these wide open concourses, and then it's almost like extra heavy duty giant garbage bag draping tarp that goes floor to ceiling to like walk through to get to the actual rink. And on the outside, there's just a couple little stands to buy things, but it's very clearly like a conference center. So that's kind of Milan in a nutshell. It's like there are these venues that exist, and when you get to them, it's the Olympics. And when you're just walking around, unless you happen to pass a store that has some signage, you're just in Milan and people are just doing their own Milan thing. Livigno's very small, and so it's definitely overtaken by the Olympics. Everyone you see is wearing the gear for their team, but it's a lot of athletes, coaches, family, and then some fans. I heard today, and I can't verify because I didn't report this yet, but a parking pass in Livigno is allegedly $2,000. They're trying to keep you from driving into it because it's so small. So if those are your favorite events and you want to make the effort to get to see Chloe Kim in the half pipe or get to see Eileen Gu in free ski slope style, you're going to go find a way to get to Livigno. A lot of people taking buses in and out for the day, but it's much smaller. And then Cortina's a fancy ass ski resort town. This is where the fancy people go for their little ski vacations. In fact, I bought a sweater that says Cortina across the front, and I realized after the fact it's very similar to when someone's wearing one that says like Vail or Aspen, right?
Stad.
It's the place that you tell people you went for your vacances. And I mean, there's a giant ice sculpture in front of the Dior store of a woman that's got skis and a fancy bag that's like twice as big as an average person. Last night, inexplicably, as we were getting ready to head to dinner, 3 people skied past us in the middle of town square, but it's cobblestone, but they were fully on skis, like old style wooden skis from like the 50s. I don't know what they were doing, but it was entertaining. And everywhere you look, you're probably running into an athlete or someone you recognize. We ended up having lunch with Peekaboo Street, former gold medalist, one of the great names in U.S. Olympic history. We've run into Sophia Kirkby, who's the luger who has called herself the most eligible bachelorette at the games. She, before coming to the games, solicited dates, and she's been going on dates throughout her Olympic journey. We've run into her multiple times. We even passed by a fancy restaurant last night where she was having one of her dates and saw her through the window. So it is sort of big and small in the sense you keep running into all these folks and people you recognize and athletes, but it's definitely got a lot more going on in Livigno, especially in the party scene. As we were leaving almost every night, we've been out till 12 or 12:30 working, get on a bus to get home, and that's when everybody's partying, and we're like, oh, back to work. Hope you guys have fun. Enjoy those beers.
Right. Well, you have run into some other famous people, unfortunately, during your time in Italy. Very famously, Vice President J.D. Vance has crashed some of the hockey events and some of the figure skating events. I remember when, you first ran into him, I think, and everyone in the press box was kind of standing up to gawk at him and, blocking everyone's view of what was actually happening on the ice. All the Italian, right?
Yeah.
What's your interaction, if any, with J.D. Vance been like?
Yes. Yeah. So no actual interactions, just we've been in the same place 3 times thus far. He came to 2 USA women's hockey games that I was at, and he was at the opening ceremony.
There was some controversy about J.D. Vance being booed by the crowd. NBC Sports was accused of not airing it or selectively editing it out in the U.S. Were you there in the arena when it happened?
This is an interesting fact from producer Alex, who I mentioned before, who knows all the things, that the opening ceremony shot that people see in the stadium on the Jumbotron, which was very small, by the way. Most people were not looking at the screen. They were looking at what was happening down below. But what they're watching and what most countries are watching is the international feed or the official Olympic feed. What America is watching is NBC Sports feed. Even somewhere like Canada is often taking the international feed. So when you watch the CBC broadcast that they showed, you see the shot of Team USA, cheers, cheers, cheers. The cutaway to J.D. Vance, boos.
There is the Vice President, J.D. Vance, and his wife, Usha. Ooh, those are not, those are a lot of boos for him. Whistling, jeering.
Back to Team USA, cheers. And they showed it on CBC and acknowledged it. People thought that because NBC Sports didn't show that same cadence, that they intentionally edited it out. I can't speak to their editorial practices, but what I can say is the shots that they took were not at the same time or in the same order. They had their own cameras doing their own cutaways. So there was no way for them, as they're talking over the top of the Team USA athletes, to necessarily register the boo that was heard and connect it to something on a screen that they weren't looking at. I'm not carrying water for NBC Sports. I don't work for them. I just think that there's so much misinformation out there that being enraged about things unnecessarily isn't necessary. There is plenty to be angry about that we know is fact. And in that case, it was interesting to know how much difference in technology and the shots that they were using might have influenced why it looked like that. Another prime example of that is everyone posting Surya Bonali doing a backflip and saying that they banned it because of her. The backflip was banned before Surya Bonali did it.
Right.
She did it with intention, knowing the ban. It had nothing to do with her race that they banned it. So those kind of things, I think, are really interesting when you decide to dig into the truth around the Olympics and a lot of the facts versus when you click aggregated angry sites.
I'm so glad that you brought up both of those points. And actually, Sarah, the Surya Bonali thing has actually really bothered me because, listen, I grew up figure skating and I grew up watching her land those backflips knowing that they were illegal. We will carry all of the water for Surya, but it was not a ban because of her, as you said. And I feel like that we are getting into this point, even for people who politically might be on the same side as we are, or when it comes to supporting women athletes and Black women athletes are on the same side as we are as well. We do ourselves a disservice when we are creating outrage over things that don't need to be outraged over.
And to be fair, they could have recut it for prime time because they showed it live. They could have recut it for prime time or made mention of it during the walk and talk for Tarico. They could have said something if they wanted to. They didn't add it in, but it also doesn't seem clear that they omitted it with intention. And that's just worth addressing. Let's just stick with facts and make sure we're being factual in our outrage because we get frustrated when it's not the case on the other side. So do the work on our side.
I completely agree. And now I do have a somewhat cynical question regarding J.D. Vance's presence at the Olympics. Because the Trump administration, led by J.D. Vance, does have this, keep men out of women's sports initiative that the Kachuk brothers are on, unfortunately. And just the idea that this administration is using protecting women's sports, quote unquote, and a support for women's sports that they had never really exhibited in the years before as cover for anti-trans discrimination and for using that as a big kind of culture war piece. Do you think that it was strategic for J.D. Vance to specifically be at a USA women's hockey match, at 2 USA women's hockey matches?
I can't speak to what else was available, but I will say that we said the same thing on our show, which was that we didn't like the idea that if he desired to, he could try to use this as a political cudgel and say, here's where I supported them. The men's hockey was not playing yet. So if he's a hockey fan or if that venue was the easiest, say, to secure, which certainly ice skating and hockey being in contained arenas is an easier place to sweep, to send in your security in advance, et cetera, than standing next to a luge track or on top of a mountain, right? So it may have been venue, it may have been proximity to where you're staying, it may have been that the men's hockey team wasn't playing yet, but either way, now he can say it as if he was supporting with intention. And we said the same thing on our show. It just would be a real shame to try to argue that they support women because of appearances like that while actively working against them in any number of ways, not just in anti-trans ways, but in the bills that the GOP is trying to pass that will severely affect Title IX, the opportunities for girls and women in sport and otherwise. So, yeah, we mentioned the same thing. It was him and Marco Rubio and their families the first night. And then the second day, it was Jake Paul who was attending with him, who's here to see his fiance, who's a speed skater, but also be with the contingent. And then the Lamoureux twins, who are former U.S. women's hockey players who are great players, but certainly have been outspoken about their anti-trans opinions and such. So I guess they're traveling with the official presidential caravan. It was a little too on the nose that the people in front of us kept standing up to block the women Olympians who had worked their whole lives and were deeply accomplished and prevented us from seeing them because they were so much more interested in seeing JD Vance and Jake Paul sit.
As you said, that's kind of the perfect metaphor for the way that women's sports and the growth of women's sports is currently being used strategically by people who never, as we said, showed support for them before. But also, we've had all these conversations about athletes and on Team USA talking about, they don't agree with everything that's happening on the country, but they're skating for the people back home who supported them. They wear the flag. They don't necessarily stand for everything that the administration is doing right now, all of that, and backlash against those statements. But it all kind of goes to show you that these athletes are being used as symbols in either direction, whether they want to or not, right? The fact that JD Vance's very presence at the Olympics can be used for political gain just kind of says it all.
I'm trying to be someone that can hold two things at once. Part of me says that there are any number of athletes who are just not equipped to speak on these things and are so laser focused on the work that they've put in to get here that they truly don't understand the scope of what's going on in their country, or maybe are interested in getting more education on that as soon as this Olympics is over. They've been working for 4 years and or a lifetime to get here, and for them, it's not worth saying anything, and or they don't feel prepared and capable of saying what they want to say correctly. The other part of me says we are so far beyond being able to say, I just don't know what to say, or I don't really want to get the attention for the wrong thing. You look at someone like Hunter Hess, who is getting death threats at this point and is getting attacked for not even speaking out against anything so much as simply saying what you said earlier, which is, here's all the things I stand for. I don't agree with everything, but when I represent the flag, I represent the things that it means to me and what I do believe in. That's not even that harsh of a statement. I'm thinking about Megan Rapinoe.
This conversation around trans athletes being able to participate and trans people being able to participate in sport is not about the protection of girls at all. It's just fear mongering in order to whip people up. And it's really sad.
And the stands that she's taken in comparison to the very soft stances from most of the athletes here, some of whom are just talking about their immigrant parents and how much it means to them to understand how immigration, matters to the U.S. And even that is something that's considered. I saw someone post the other day when someone says that they're for kindness and humanity, and then the other side's you can't say that shit about us. It's I just said I wanted kindness and humanity. How did you immediately know I was against you? You're calling yourselves out. But I'm trying to be empathetic in a way I have been always for athletes who are not well-versed or well-spoken in this. And there is a big part of me that's we are so far past that. People, anyone who's not saying something is complicit. And if you can't say it off the top, write it down. Michaela Schifrin decided to quote Nelson Mandela. It wasn't the most powerful thing I've ever heard, but she was intentional. She brought it with her. She read it. Maybe she knew she wouldn't be good extemporaneously.
I actually have some thought. I can read something that I had written, if you guys don't mind.
Go ahead.
Peace is not just the absence of conflict. Peace is the creation of an environment where we can all flourish, regardless of race, color, creed.
I would much rather at least see that than the sort of mealy-mouthed, I wish politics weren't a part of the Olympics. It's about being, together and united.
I agree with you on 2 points there. I will say that I have a lot more sympathy for Olympic athletes, especially those who aren't of the stature or level of fame as Michaela Schifrin. Nobody's making money really from being here. We don't have any taxpayer money. They're not press trained in the same way. Some of these kids are 17 years old.
Yeah. They don't know anything else. They're like, oh, the world really sucks, doesn't it? We're like, well, it does, but it hasn't always sucked so bad. And we're sorry that your 17 years have been exclusively suck.
Going back to the actual sports here, because there is some really fucking phenomenal hockey going on on Team USA's side. And I want to talk about the implications for that longer term. But just from you seeing these women, and I will say that we are taping this on Sunday. The semifinal is going to be played on Monday. So by the time this episode drops, hopefully the Team USA will be in the finals, which will be that Thursday.
No jinx.
No jinx at all. But in the group stage round, these women outscored opponents, including Team Canada, 20-1. We are seeing insane dominance from these women. Yeah. And obviously these women have always performed at a very high level. We've got a team led by Hillary Knight, the old guard veteran captain in charge. But what are you seeing this year that has flipped that switch to total dominance?
It's a couple things. For those who don't know, women's hockey didn't get introduced at the Olympics till 1998. And since it did, only Canada and the U.S. have won. And only once was the final not Canada versus the U.S. So this is a rivalry that goes back to the beginning, and it is a heated rivalry, now that that phrase has been stolen. But there are plenty of examples of women from both teams getting married.
We had the captain of Team USA and Team Canada get married as well.
Julie Chu and Carolyn Ouellette. We've got a lot of stories, actually, of heated rivalries in the women's sports side. So if you're into hockey and gay shit, you're barking up the wrong tree on the men's side. But it is an incredible rivalry. The fascinating difference is this is the first Olympics since the PWHL. We're in the third season of the Professional Women's Hockey League, which is a place that has merged all of the best talent from primarily the US and Canada and then a number of other countries. So these are players who used to see each other during rivalry series games, during these quadrants where they would go work with each other's national teams and then play each other and get practice and all that stuff. They used to see each other quite rarely. And I have heard tales of them being unwilling to get on the same elevator together. That's how much they hate each other. But it's a little different now when half of your team, if you're a US player, is Canadian, or if you're a Canadian player and some of your favorite teammates are American. And so there's a shift in that, and it's not dulled the rivalry at all, I'll tell you that much. They both want to win just as bad. But it has changed their understanding and comfortability and knowledge of each other and each other's games. And I think the PWHL in its 3 seasons, we already had a tremendously talented U.S. team, but hockey is Canada's sport, and hockey is where Canada invests. Having this league and having the pipeline continue to grow for women's hockey, I think is going to serve the U.S. in a way that it hadn't been served by previous professional iterations that failed. You also are just looking at a team that has crazy veterans plus crazy young talent. Layla Edwards is still in college. The first Black woman to play for Team USA hockey in the Olympics, the first Black woman to score for Team USA in the Olympics. You've got Hillary Knight, who is, during this Olympics, absolutely certain to pass the points and goals and everything else. She's going to break all the records. She's the first American of any gender to play in 5 Olympics. You've got Kendall Coyne-Schofield, who's a multi-time Olympic veteran. And I think one of the most cool things about this team is if you look up and down the score sheet and if you watch the games and look at the assists, it really feels like they don't care who scores. Mm-hmm. It's, let me set this person up with the sickest assist for this easy top shelf beauty with no one between me and the goalie. And I think that really stands out. And it's not to say that Canada's not doing that. I think this USA team is just faster, stronger, more skilled, better, all the things. And I don't want to jinx them. They swept the rivalry series. Neither U.S. nor Canada has ever swept the 4-game rivalry series that they play every year. They've shut them out. Their biggest rival was not even close in that group stage. So they are looking real good.
The way the scoring has been spread around has been so encouraging to see. I mean, you want to talk about youth combined with the veterans here. We've got this defensewoman in Caroline Harvey who is being compared to Bobby Orr, who is still in college, will probably be the number 1 pick in the PWHL draft this year. And then you've got Gwyneth Phillips in goal, 2 straight shutouts as of recording here. Now she faced, I think, 6 shots on goal against Italy. But
right. Well, and she's in there because, I mean, Gwyneth Phillips is great too, but Erin Frankel was such a wall that they were like, hey, let's just get Gwyneth some reps. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So that if something happens, I think they're going to go back to Erin, who, by the way, has an entire Instagram page dedicated to rating Caesar salads. Including a Caesar wiener that's on there. Make sure you scroll long enough. It's called Pain by Romaine, and you got to scroll deep enough to get to at least the Caesar wiener. But yeah, I mean, both goalies are lights out.
You make such a good point about the fact that the PWHL, and we've had other iterations of women's national hockey leagues, and the PWHL is trying to correct the mistakes of the past, and so far has been extremely successful.
And they were always separate. There was always America, and then Canada had its own. So this is the first time that they really put in the effort, and the investment is there to create what it needs to be, which is for it to be a North American league.
And it has translated to ticket sales. It has absolutely translated, especially in cities like yours and mine, like people are coming out to watch these women in droves. But I think it's also a really important point from a developmental standpoint. Whenever we look at leagues that are trying to establish themselves in sports that are already kind of established, I think specifically about tennis. I think a lot about, obviously, women's hockey is one. Volleyball is going to be another. Figure skating. I did this whole piece with Jackie Wong 8 years ago about the decline of American women's figure skating. And obviously in the 8 years since then, we have seen this incredible growth. But it always kind of comes down to the quality of your competition at the developmental stage, at younger ages, at the college and beginnings of professional stages, and how often you play those players. So the fact that, the best hockey players, the best women's hockey players in the world, in the Americans and the Canadians, are now playing each other regularly during a regular season just makes everybody's talent level better.
And just consistent play play that matters. There was the Dream Gap Tour, which was something that the U.S. team put together to get more, not just games, but in front of crowds and selling tickets and reinforcing, revenue for Team USA. But there was not this consistent league that allowed them to continue to get better. They don't need to do these sort of quadrant camps the same way anymore with their national teams because they have PWHL, which is keeping them at their highest level. So, I just saw on Instagram that someone forwarded me the other day of a girl. She's a junior hockey player, and she has an Instagram, and it's every single day. It's day 325 on the road to the PWHL, her taking shots in her driveway. Day 326 on the road. And it is exactly the kind of thing that's required for young girls to sort of see this path to the pros that will put more time, more effort, more money, more engagement, everything else into the sport that they love.
I do have to ask, this is always the question that we ask every 2 years, every 4 years, when there's an Olympics, when there's a World Cup, is how do we sustain this momentum? How do we get, and people are watching the PWHL, but how do we take this moment, especially with how dominant the American women have been, and further extend this? And I'm asking this to you both as a hockey fan, as a person who is covering the Olympics, and also as someone who is developing and has developed a women's sports podcast network at iHeartRadio and has seen the engagement with this content and with these athletes and with these sports.
Well, I have to say the one nice thing is when I started at, say, ESPNW in like 2010, and we talked about how to create sustainable momentum post-Olympics, you knew that the iterations of women's professional soccer that came before the NWSL got little bumps from it, but there was so little awareness that those leagues exist, WPS and the other iterations that were pre-NWSL, that there wasn't enough money in marketing. There wasn't enough value in the games that you went to watch. You could tell that the budgets were low to really capitalize. And what we did see in the more recent Olympics with the NWSL, which is now over a decade old, is that they were better able to capitalize on people saying, wait, that person plays in my backyard, or wait, I can go watch that person I watched on the Olympic or World Cup stage. And I think that's the biggest thing for sustained change is that leagues now exist. There is a PWHL, and I have been really impressed by their marketing, especially their takeover tour. This is where they take 2 teams from the league and they play in a neutral site city, so somewhere that doesn't already have a team. And they have broken both American and Canadian records for attendance with these teams, with these games that are featuring these teams that go to these neutral site cities. And They do such a great job of selling the sport and the athletes and the traditions that have become organic in just 3 seasons for these teams. That is going to make the biggest difference, because it's not just about changing ideas about where women belong and how women athletes should behave or look or dress or anything like that. That's a huge part of it. And society being much more accepting of presentation, whether it's gender or otherwise, is a huge part of women's sports growing. But just as much is continuity and reps. How do I watch? Where do I watch? Can I stream it? Can I find it on my TV? Can I go see it in person? And the more expansion you have, you also have more markets that have teams that are in their city that they hear about, that they know the names, that they start to recognize. And that institutional knowledge, frankly, is part of the reason I wanted to do my show. How do you have 8 billion daily men's sports shows and we're the first and only daily women's sports show? Because you need to give people the story, stakes, stats, and stars, the context every single day, the repeated conversations so that they internalize the information and they go flipping on their channels. Oh, wait, this is the one where the 2 people are married. I'm going to watch this. Or oh, this is the one where this girl's coming back after she was injured and this is her first game back, right? Those are the storylines that people are drawn to because of an ESPN Sports Center hit or whatever else. And we just don't do that for women's sports. So I think being able to access those games regularly, not year round, but whenever the season is for those sports, is going to make the biggest difference in terms of what we've seen in the past for Olympic bumps.
Do you think there's also been a shift in the attitudes towards telling those stories about women athletes? Because I feel like in the past, whenever there would be a, let's, for lack of a better way to put it, the human interest story about these women, and, you know, we tell these stories about men all the time. It's why we care about them for the most part. But I feel like in the past, there was always kind of an attitude that, oh, the human interest part is because, you know, they're so interesting, but, you know, it kind of takes away from their like athletic ability, which obviously isn't true. Have you seen a shift in that attitude that we can tell these women's stories and still respect them as athletes?
Yeah, I think the problem was there was only 2 lanes in the past. It was infantilizing. This is your little girl all grown up, and she's such a great little role model. Or sexualizing. That was it. You were either a little girl all grown up role model, girl next door, or you were overly sexualized to the point where it was distracting from the fact that you were an elite level athlete. Now I think across everything, but especially women's sport, there is such an acceptance of multi-dimensional people. They are gay, straight, they are funny, they are serious, they're sort of like our heroes, they're our villains, you know, all these different things. And as soon as you let someone be authentically themselves and multi-dimensional, they become much more interesting. Duh, right? And so, yes, I think the features are digging into that, and the women are feeling more comfortable being themselves and being all the things that they are in those interviews, which then appeals to so many more people. And, you know, I'm sure you know this, Kavitha, but as writers, we know this as songwriters, like anybody in the creative field knows specificity is relatability. You would think it would be the opposite, but it's actually not paint as broad of a brush as you can. It's be very specific, and people will find themselves in that. And that's what these women athletes are doing now, is owning very specifically to whoever they are. They could be the stud buds, and they want you to know, that's Courtney Williams and Natisha Heidemann, for those who don't know, in the WNBA. They want you to know that they're mask-presenting queer women in the WNBA, and that their approach is going to be different from a more femme queer woman or a straight woman or someone who's already partnered, because stud buds are single and they're always, you know, trying to shoot their shot. Like, that niche would feel too niche until you realize that everyone is drawn to it because you're just watching people be wholly themselves. And that's the biggest difference for me.
I am thinking about how fucking terrible the New York Rangers are currently and how it is still so expensive to go and see them. And if I've got a really good friend who is from Wisconsin, from Milwaukee, has lived in New York for more than 20 years. She didn't grow up, obviously, with a professional hockey team in Milwaukee. So she didn't get into hockey professionally until she moved to New York. And she's never been to a Rangers game. And I was like, I mean, it might be cheaper now, slightly, but it's still not, it's not the product I would want you to see.
Yeah. If you're going to spend this dough, watch some good hockey.
The New York Sirens are about to take over, and they're going to play Seattle in Madison Square Garden next month. And if it's not already sold out, it's going to be sold out. It's going to be a much better product. And that's absolutely what I'm going to take her to.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is because, you know, you and I just met in Philly at an Unrivaled game, which was the largest attended women's basketball game in history. More than 20,000 people showed out.
Regular season, yeah.
Regular season, exactly. Sorry. We are taping this on NBA All-Star Weekend at a time when every talking head, male or female, is talking about how we fix All-Star Weekend because it's broken and boring and all of that. And in the middle of Saturday night's 3-point contest, dunk contest, skills challenge, all of that, we also had the Unrivaled 1v1 tournament, which I had on the big screen. I had the NBA stuff on the small screen. The 1v1 tournament was so compelling and so much fun to watch. And there have been all kinds of people saying that the NBA should adopt something like that. And I feel like you also have a lot of like old school basketball heads who kind of want to yell at the cloud about what's happening at the NBA, but they're now coming to see how good the basketball is on the women's side. So do you think it also will be a great boon for the women's sports that some of the men's sports are kind of horrible to watch right now?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's something to be said for what people say they want out of their sports and how much of what they say they want is women's sports and how much they just have decided that that doesn't count. And so they continue to watch the men's sports in their city without even trying or paying attention to the women, not realizing that they'd rather pay less, maybe bring their family, maybe actually meet the players, have them be insanely competitive the entire time because they're not coasting on their millions and millions of dollars, right? There's a lot of aspects of women's sport that appeal to people once they open up their eyes to it. And this 1v1 is a perfect example. And I've heard plenty of men say this too, so this isn't just my opinion. The NBA players' egos are too big to get embarrassed against each other, 1v1.
It's funny because I did see Jamel Hill say that. I saw her say that 1v1 would be great in the NBA, but none of the players that we want to watch facing up, they won't do it because they don't want to be embarrassed.
They won't do it. You know how many men make business decisions in football or basketball? Like, for those who don't know that term, it's like, oh, you're going to get dunked on, so instead of playing defense, you just scoot on out of the way. It's a business decision. I don't want this highlight of me getting dunked on my face going around. And I get it, but women do not play like that. And that is why sometimes men will be watching women's games for the first time, see the Caitlin Clark hysteria, when a whole bunch of people watch the WNBA for the first time and they're like, this is crazy. They're so physical. And it's like, yeah. They want to beat each other's asses. It's sports. That's what sports is. What do you think women are doing when they're professional athletes? Those same people are complaining about how the NBA are too, hanging on the banana boat and they don't hate each other enough anymore. They don't scrap during games. They don't understand that they're speaking out both sides of their mouth. Well, I'm not interested in that over there, but I really wish they would do it. The other thing I'd say, Kavitha, that's really fascinating is because of the agility of women's sports at this particular time, they are being inventive in ways that I think very much could influence men's sports when they get to this stale point. One is, Unrivaled has an Elam ending for every game. For those who don't know, it's a point total in the fourth quarter that has to be reached by teams as opposed to a clock. It means you're not ending any games with boring old free throws, draining the clock out, anything else. It is a game winner every single game. That's something the NBA has used in an All-Star game before. And I'm not saying that the NBA would ever change to that regularly, but that's a whole league operating completely differently. The PWHL has a rule that if a team scores while shorthanded, so if your team takes a penalty, you have one fewer player on the ice and you score a goal anyway, it's called jailbreak, and your player that's in the sin bin gets out early. They're telling you, hey, congrats on, the NHL could do that. The PWH also has a tanking solution whereby once you've been eliminated from the postseason, you get points for every game you win after that toward your lottery pick. So instead of the best pick going to the worst team at the end, it goes to the one that performed the best after being eliminated, which gives you incentive to keep trying throughout the end of the season. All of these agile ways to work, because people aren't as beholden to old-fashioned rules from a league that's been around a century plus, allow it to be fresh and new. And there might be some times that, the NBA has been using the WNBA as an incubator for years for ideas, but there might be some things coming out of women's sports that might actually change the men's game.
Yeah, the agility there, as you said, I mean, from both an on-court or on-ice perspective and from a marketing perspective, the women's leagues have always been just a lot more innovative in the people that they've chosen to partner with and the ideas that they've had. And they just don't face as much inertia as the men's leagues do. So
Unrivaled's a great example of that.
Unrivaled is a fantastic example of that. And you're talking about a league that does have direct rival in the WNBA, obviously.
And fun fact about the 1v1 tournament you just mentioned, Chelsea Gray won $200,000 for winning it, which is more than her salary last year in the WNBA. They are very different leagues. The cost is very different because of flights and hotels and practice venues and facilities and everything else. But just to say that there is a ton of money to be made in very smart, creative marketing and investment, which is what Unrivaled has showed at every turn.
Well, and I'm also glad you brought that up because one of Jamel's points, which I don't disagree with, but one of her points in there not being a realistic possibility of bringing a 1v1 tournament to the NBA is that there isn't that financial incentive also, because most of the people that we would want to be watching
have endless money.
I think that is absolutely true, right? But I will say that I had my mind completely turned around when it came to this NBA Cup bullshit because, and that's not just because the Knicks won this year. I still think that it's a kind of bullshit tournament. But you really did see players care about this, and obviously you've got two-way players, and you've got players on NBA rosters who aren't making more than rookie minimum or anything like that. And this was a lot of money to them. You had Tyler Kolek say that he bought his mom a car and couldn't really afford to do that without this. But there is something about like the ego and like even when you're making millions of dollars, an extra $100,000 or $500,000,
nice.
It's a nice kind of little bonus to have. So,
I would love to see it. I don't know what the balance of the money would need to be for the ego issue, but why not inspire them? Why not fire them up with some bragging rights of being able to have beaten your boys? That's an interesting, if you really dug into the difference between the men and women in these leagues, how they handle being shown up. It's fascinating.
You and I both get annoyed when sports podcasts hosted by women only talk about the goss. There has been so much drama in these Olympics, though, that I feel like we have to talk about some of it.
We must address the goss.
We must address some of the goss. Like, I mean, where do you want to start? The condoms running out is just a story that we have in every Olympics. I don't understand how this keeps happening. Why they thought 10,000 condoms was enough is just fucking beyond me. Then there's obviously that we had a shouting match with a bunch of cursing and curling the other day.
Yes,
which
the men were emotional.
The men were emotional. Men are too emotional to throw a rock on ice in
I'm starting to
skates.
wonder if sports is the right place for men.
And then, we have obviously the actual like drama in ice dancing that could or could not have cost the U.S. gold medal. It always comes down to French judging and judging of French teams in skating.
We got rid of the Russian judge, but we still have the French judge to deal with.
Exactly, right. And like one part of that story that I think needs to not be lost is that the male partner on the French team that ended up winning gold has been accused by his former partner of being abusive. Workplace abusive, not physically, not sexually.
Yeah, and like potentially mentally abusive, but I will say that my opinion on him was a little bit stronger. And then I said, you know what, I really should read the specifics and find what the line is between elite athlete who is very demanding versus toxic. And I would imagine if a woman is writing a book about it and reporting it, it went past the line. But I'm not familiar enough with the story to know. What was more interesting to me was that his partner's fiance, I believe or boyfriend or whatever, has been accused of serious issues. And so I'm like, what is this lady doing? She's still with her partner, life partner, who's been accused of shit. And her skating partner is also I don't know.
I think my favorite drama piece here is
gotta be the Norwegian biathlon, right?
Yes. I mean, admitting on cheating on your girlfriend
and thinking it's going to work,
thinking she's going to forgive you after that. And I hate that she had to answer this, but I love what she said about it.
Basically, we are never, ever, ever getting back together.
Right. Let's throw a Taylor Swift at you. Right.
Yeah.
I think other than that, though, my favorite story is the French biathletes, one of whom won gold after being convicted of credit card fraud against her teammate.
Yeah, she stole credit cards from her own teammate and staff and racked up some bills. And what's wild to me is they won the team event.
They won the team event together.
You know what? Anything anyone says is a quote unquote distraction, I'm going to hold it up next to, but did they steal your credit cards? Because if not, you could still win gold. Power through it.
Do we also think there's something to be said about the one snow sport involving a gun having the athlete convicted of petty theft?
That's what I said. I said bad combo. But you know what? Producer Alex, who again knows all, said that she was surprised that all the mess was in biathlon because it's a sport known for its good sportsmanship, for like staff members helping opposing teams out with a variety of different things that can go wrong during a race and being helpful in a way that helps an opponent, and how it's like renowned for that. But I don't know, you throw a gun into anything and it gets a little messier.
Well, Sarah, do you think there has been more drama this year? Because there's always some kind of drama. There's always some kind of like weird personal beef. There's always a lot of sex happening at the Olympic Village.
I think less. I mean, one thing that's interesting is how often the lead up to the games is just gasping, salacious. They're not going to finish X. They've burned down this. And sometimes those stories are very accurate. But once the games start, we're like, screw that slum that they raised in order to build new housing. We don't care anymore because look, there's sports to watch. That's one of the reasons many people have, deep-seated issues with the Olympics. It provides a lot of good, and also it can be very damaging to the places that hold it. I would say that this feels like there's less drama of that major giant nature because other than the hockey rink, they had all the facilities already built. It is the most widespread geographic Olympics, so they have space and places for all the things, so they have not been accused. There is some criticism of some environmental effects that they promised wouldn't be affected, and now there's some old-growth forests that allegedly have been affected, and so there's some of that. But compared to, say, Rio with Zika, compared to Pyeongchang, there was a lot of issues. Beijing, even especially with COVID. I remember Sochi, not only the animals that were allegedly being put down, but human beings who were being moved out of their homes. Like, I feel like this is less drama than those. More tea, less drama.
That's a good distinction to have, I think. More tea and less drama. Sarah, what are you looking forward to for the rest of these games, and when do you come back to us?
Oh my gosh. So lots of things. I'm going to go to my first monobob, which is a bobsled single woman, and Alana Myers-Taylor is in her 5th Olympics. She is an incredible superhero of a woman. She has 2 kids with special needs while she's competing in her 40s, trying to become, she's already the most awarded Black athlete in the history of the Winter Olympics. She's trying to keep adding to her total. She would tie Dorothy Hamill if she medals in both of her events at these games as the, I think, winningest Winter Olympic or most medaled Winter Olympic athlete ever for America. She's just such a badass, and I'm going to get to see her for the first time. Yesterday was my first time at any sort of sliding sport. I watched the skeleton, and it's just like such a fascinating and completely different vibe. I'm super excited for the medal games, both bronze and gold in women's hockey. That is, to me, like the pinnacle of all of this. And then, I've got some more skiing. I went and saw Michaela Schifrin in person for the first time today. Disappointing kind of outcome, although she's not been great in Olympics. We see so much of her success on the World Cup, and Olympics has not really been the place for her. So I think this might have actually been a slightly better finish than this event at previous games. So one thing that Alex and I have been talking about is how hard it is for people who don't follow these sports year-round to know exactly how it should go. And so the headlines will always be disappointing or Michaela Schifrin fails to medal, by folks who haven't been necessarily following the World Cup standings to know that she wasn't necessarily in this event a favorite just because she is the greatest skier of all time.
This was the giant slalom that she failed to medal on today. And we're taping this on Sunday. She has her best event coming up in the slalom on Wednesday. So I believe it would be her 4th Olympic medal, which would tie her with Julia Mancuso for the most by an alpine skier. It's Michaela Schifrin, who was last year, I think, just won her 100th World Cup.
Yeah. No, she's insane. She's far and away the winningest. And in so many countries, the Olympics are cool. The World Cup globe that you win is the thing. And so for Americans, we don't really always understand how sports work outside of our little bubble, which is something I think Michaela even kind of alluded to and addressed in the post that she wrote about the expectations and the weight of, there is a very particular weight for athletes in a sport that's not well understood, because you will get questions, headlines, stories, reporting from folks who are not super familiar, applying their beliefs or expectations sort of unfairly and putting the pressure on people who know otherwise based on being deeply rooted in a sport that's very hard to repeat in, very hard to be consistent in, very hard to, all that other stuff.
Yeah, every 4 years, we all somehow become curling experts.
Yeah, I will fully admit I'm not, but I'm going to my first curling in person, and I'm super pumped for that. And I have been told by multiple people here, including Peekaboo Street, I mentioned earlier, went to lunch with her, that she went once and she's so hooked. She's like sending herself to Utah, this city that's hosting like a world event in curling. And so I've been told once I see it in person, it's over for me. I'm going to be obsessed.
Yeah, one of my best friends is Canadian from Toronto, and he and I went to college together. So he actually took me to a curling club that I didn't know existed in New York.
Amazing. With real ice and everything?
With real ice.
I've curled in Chicago a bunch, but it's not real ice, but it's still fun.
By the way, drop Peekaboo Street's name every chance you get. Like, absolutely. That would.
I absolutely will.
But I feel like, one of the best tweets I saw was everyone's complaining that they don't speak Spanish, so they're not going to understand Bad Bunnies. And he was like, I don't understand curling, and I've been watching it glued to my TV for 3 days.
Right.
So, yeah, Sarah, always good to talk to you. We're going to talk again, definitely, especially as some movement hopefully happens with the CBA negotiations with the WNBA.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
I hope you get a little bit of rest when you come back, and maybe some warmth. It's probably colder in Chicago now than it is in Milan.
It's been chilly here, but I have been more than capable, seeing as it was 0 for the days before I was leaving, and it's in the 30s. So I'm standing outside for, 7 hours at a time, but I've got all the gear because I'm a Chicago gal.
Now, hardy and true. Sarah Spain, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into Sportly. Tune in next week and every week after as we dive into another great story. And if you like what you're hearing, rate and review us on your favorite podcast app, or come tell us on Instagram. You'll find us at @SportlyPod. Sportly is an Immigrantly Media production. This episode was produced by Paroma Chakravarti. Our executive producer is Sadia Khan. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week and every week after for more Sportly.